Hi, I'm Becky Parker Geist. I am the host of the Audiobook Connection podcast, Behind the Scenes with the Creative Teams. I'm also president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and the CEO of Pro Audio Voices, providing audiobook and podcast production, distribution, and marketing. And I'm excited to have with me today Catherine Harrington, author of The Longest War, a psychotherapist's experience of divorce, custody, and power. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a joy.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background, kind of, where you got started and feel free to share, anything from either your childhood, your youth, or starting with a professional career.
Well, I grew up in a very traditional patriarchal family. Um, and that's also part of the book about how one sheds one's childhood if one wants to.
Yeah.
Um, and so I married young, had children young, and then decided that marriage wasn't for me. And then I needed to earn a living. So I went back to school and became a psychotherapist.
Yeah. And you've been a psychotherapist for how many years now?
Oh, lots since 78. So that's 40 some years.
Yeah. So a lot of experience and clients over that time, I would expect.
Right.
Yes. Great. And what was it that stirred you that to write this story? What was it that brought you to that point of like, I've got to write this down. I need to share it with the world.
Well, for many years, I knew I needed to write it down just for my own. I needed to know what happened. It was
Yeah.
so stressful, traumatic. I was just surviving day to day. And I could not have told you a sequence of events like survivors of trauma. They only have fragments, and I had fragments.
Yeah.
So I knew I needed to write it down just to understand it for myself.
Right.
I started in 1999, which was 20 years after our last court appearance with
Hmm.
with my ex-husband.
Yeah.
And that was still too early. I thought 20 years
Mm.
should have been enough, but it wasn't.
Wow.
All I could do was write and cry and then write a little. So I took a break until 2017. And then I signed up with a course of novel or memoir in a year, did that in a year, 2018, revised it, took a break in 2019, I guess a little more than that, and then submitted it for publication in 2021, 22. No,
Hmm.
not 20. Anyway, sometime in there.
Yeah.
Then revised, and now it's coming out in 24.
Yeah. Wow. And yeah, I know from also from my own experience of dealing with trauma, although different kind of trauma, but the trauma of losing my sister when we were in our 20s at that time. Um, the power of being able to write things down and looking back, I sometimes I would read those journals from many years before and go, wow, I didn't remember that, I wouldn't
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
Well, I saved every paper that he wrote me and a copy of what I wrote him.
Yeah.
And there was no internet. So all of our communication was either through lawyers, but it was all US Postal Service, which
Right.
amazes me now.
Right.
Yes. And I then spent a long time typing every document, every letter into my computer so I could have a chronological
Yeah.
not memory, chronological record of
Right.
events.
Right.
And then that provided the basis for me to figure out what actually happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Was there a point, do you recall that point at which you felt like, well, you knew you needed to write it down for your own benefit?
Yeah.
Was there a moment that you recall that was like, I this is bigger than just me and I need to share this with the world, your story?
That's just crept in the last months, maybe
Mm,
even weeks.
mhm.
Um, I didn't start out thinking I had a story to share with the world. I just knew I had a story for me.
Yeah.
And then as I worked on it and people read parts of it and said, "Oh yeah, this is more universal." And I, I'm ambitious and have spent my life competing, so I thought, yeah, I want to publish it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Did you find
and
that
so
affirming as people were saying, yes, this is an experience that many of us out here in the world are having, that it wasn't I mean, I don't know if you at the time were having that feeling of it's just me.
No, I knew it. Well, I don't really know. It felt like it was just me,
Mm-hmm.
and writing it felt just me. It
Yeah.
felt too grandiose to think that I could offer something to the world. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
um, and it still feels a little grandiose, but enough people have said, "Oh yeah, I want to give this book to my sister. She needs it." I think,
Yeah.
okay, maybe there are a few people out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is one of the great values and the power of um, publishing and also audiobooks as a part of that, being this the experience of sharing our stories one with the other is so much of the glue that holds us together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that audiobook now is available. And thank you for creating your company and making your particular kind available.
Like, yeah.
Because I have two friends. One is, well, they're both nearly blind, and they
Mm,
both wanted to read it, but they can't. So I'm very glad to have an option for them.
yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So what would you say as you think now about your book, what would you say is kind of the overall message that i- or messages that are in your book, The Longest War?
Well, of course, I was thinking about that in preparing for today, and um, realized I think there are two kinds of categories. The first one is sort of life lessons that I've learned. What were my life lessons? I know I have them. Um, oh, that we are born into our destiny. I mean, we're born into the
Mm,
family we're born into, in the country, in the time of history. That's we're born into our fate, I should say. We're born into our fate. We create our destiny by our choices and how we live our life.
mm, nice.
And secondly, we uh, we tend to repeat our childhood patterns unconsciously unless we take hold and decide we want to change them.
Right.
Um, and so a lot of this book is about the way I grew up and the ways I repeated it that didn't work for me, and then how I had to change.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up very accommodating and sort of subservient because I had a mother who was dangerous if I weren't subservient.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
married somebody like that. And then once I had to learn through the custody fight not to be subservient. I had to learn to develop a backbone and stand up for what I saw as right.
Yeah.
And that was a life-changing lesson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of, there are two categories. One is the life lessons, and the second is the specific. In life lessons, one is whatever comes at us, our difficulties, I think, are there for us to teach us something.
Yeah.
And we should not waste those opportunities and go inside and learn and shape and so get help.
Yeah.
And then the specific was the custody fight was my specific of life's difficulties and what I had to do to survive that and to protect my children as best I could and come out whole and have our relationships come out whole.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and to do that, it, I mean, there's three, if someone's in a custody fight, I have three things that I think are really crucial.
Mm,
One is never give up, just persevere. Um, I can almost cry as I say that, so I'm going to move right on. And the
okay.
other, um, what was my other? Oh, is you have to behave well. I
Mm,
mean, and that means a whole lot of internal self-control. You cannot just be impulsive and angry and, act out whatever you want to do. You have to behave well and take charge. And the third was using love as fuel, because to get through any fight, you need a lot of fuel. And love of my children was the only thing that kept me in it. I mean,
mm,
I felt like giving up. I can't tell you how many times.
yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, I cannot leave them motherless. So here I am. What am I going to do next? How will I get through it?
Right. It sounds like it is really a tale of resilience as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, along with eating some cookies, and in there, I also talk
Oh,
about having
no,
smoked
that helps.
marijuana. It's like, okay, a few things to get me through.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Tell us a little bit more about, it might be obvious, but a little bit more about the title, The Longest War. You chose that title, obviously, with some deliberation, what led you to name it The Longest War?
Well, my original and working title was Forbidden Mother.
Mm.
But that doesn't work well with search engine optimization, because if you look up Forbidden Mother, it turns toward the exotic mothers who are off limits to you
Mm.
sexually.
Oh,
And I hadn't even thought about that.
yeah.
But my publisher came up with the title, and I think it's a good one.
Hmm.
In writing the book, when it became clear that our divorce was not going to be as peaceful as I had anticipated, at one point I wrote in the writing, I said, "This is war," which was like startled me. I hadn't had any idea we were going to be at war with each other.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, there was a scene in our living room here that it's like I realized he could no longer hurt me or the children, and that the war was over.
Mm.
So I think the publisher just lifted it from my writing and, picked it out, and probably put in psychotherapists to help with some words.
Yeah. 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 The subtitles are important as well.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so what do you hope that your readers and your listeners will take away from their experience with your content?
That they're responsible for their own lives. We all are responsible for our own lives. And whatever trauma we have had, whatever's come at us, it's our job to shape it the way we can. And to do that, I think we definitely need support. I mean, and we need energy and we need maturity. We
Yeah.
can't do it. I certainly could not have done it alone. I sought out all kinds of helpers, and they were essential to me.
Yeah.
Um, but I think to stay blaming my mother and father were mean to me doesn't help my life at all. So it's like, okay, I can say that, I can know it, but then what? It's up to me
Right.
to make a good life.
Right. It's
Um,
kind of in some ways not choosing to just take the responsibility for making our next choices of what we'd like to do is just staying in the blame place just kind of leaves us in that disempowered,
yeah,
well, oh, this happened to me and therefore I am powerless, is
yeah,
kind of the message we send ourselves rather than, okay, this thing happened to me and what would I like instead? How will I move
yeah.
forward? Yeah.
In
Um,
reca in going over all the court documents and so forth, there was a point that I realized my ex had been telling me I was no good and not a good mother, and I was all kinds of things. And I kept trying to accommodate. Well, if you think this, let me offer that, so forth. But there was one point that I just thought, wait a minute. And I took the reins and I sued him rather than waiting for him to sue me. And it's like, okay, you can call me negligent, but I look back at my son's school records. n- Uh, neither one of them was ever tardy. And one had 4 absences and the other had 3 or something. I thought, wait, you can't be a negligent mother and have no tardies for your elementary school
the
children.
yeah, the evidence proves otherwise.
Right.
That's great.
And then
Yeah.
there was another thing he blamed me for. Well, he blamed me for lots of things, but in some of the court documents, I needed therapy and I got therapy, and he was anti-therapy and thought I was dependent upon it. And I was in ways, but necessarily.
Mhm.
But he accused me of spending 13% of my gross income on therapy. And why would one need to do that? Blah, 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 blah. And I thought I needed to do that to save myself and save my sons. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I didn't have a lot of money, but what money I had, I invested it in me and our relationships and trying to make things work.
For your audiobook, your narrator, Victoria Stevens, narrated the book. Tell us a little bit about what that process of selection, the casting process, was like for you. Being a memoir, many authors find that they're in a bit of a quandary as to whether they must read it themselves or whether they can trust that personal story to someone else. Sometimes we hear that it's, especially with painful journeys, that it's important to not have to relive so much in the telling. What was your experience?
Well, I never considered reading it myself. Number one, I'm not capable and I didn't want to relive it,
Yeah,
um, or spend my hours that way.
right.
And I don't trust my voice all the time. So it was like somebody else better do it.
Yeah,
And you provided, I don't know, 11 or 12 uh, auditions. And I listened to them and I chose 3 or 4 that I thought were good. They all were fine.
yeah,
Um, and then sort of tried to remember which one was my first take of which one I liked, and I chose her.
yeah,
And
right.
then there was some back and forth. She said some things in ways that I found didn't match the meaning of what I meant.
Hmm.
So I gave her some feedback and she took it graciously and redid it and came out fine.
That's great. Yeah, one of this is so helpful because a lot of people who listen to the podcast are authors who are in the process of figuring out what they're going to do about their audiobook, and so
Yeah,
giving them sort of a preview of some of the things that can happen, and that that one of those first steps once someone is cast is actually that what we call the first 15, where you get to
yeah.
listen to the beginning and make sure that the choice was a good one, and that it's a fit, and that also if there's any the direction that needs to happen, that
Mhm.
happens at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. And you all have been wonderful to work with.
Oh, thank you.
Um, I went on a trip recently and we were down to the deadline of needing to, sign paper, not papers, but anyway, uh, get this on the road for my publication date.
Yeah.
And your project manager spent Sunday morning with me trying to go over stuff. So I very much appreciate your dedication.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So, just to expand on that a little bit, so each author or project, has a dedicated project manager, and we make sure that we support you in what you need, but also that you're getting regular updates, so you know exactly what's going on each week. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And then, as you listened to the finished audiobook, or that, to for in that process of first review. Was there anything about that, or even about the rest of the process, that either kind of stands out to you, or was any surprising at all, or just something like, oh wow, an aha moment? Anything?
Well, I guess mostly the dedication of paying attention to me and my needs and getting things done and being responsive. And I know the way you structured it, we as authors, I'm not quite into this phase of it yet, but we get better royalties than typically in other ways.
Right.
Um, so no, it was a smooth process. Uh, and and I recommend your company and
Well,
you.
thank you very much. And so, what Catherine is referring to is Amplify Audiobooks, which is where, with every sale as an author, you earn much higher royalties than you can anywhere else out there. So, that, in addition to having extra opportunities or tools to work with as you market your audiobook. So. And your audiobook is currently live on Amplify Audiobooks, so we want to encourage our listeners to go check that out and get their
How does
copy.
one check that out? Did you go to Amplify
You can
on?
go to you can go to amplifyaudiobooks.com. Um, you can also find it on proaudiovoices.com. But then, once you get the book, the audiobook, if that's your first book on Amplify Audiobooks, then you're going to need to download the app. And this is just like you would with any other, like if you were a new Audible subscriber, for example, you would have to download their app to listen. And so once you have the app downloaded, then you log in to the app using the same login credentials, and your audiobook will show up right there in your library.
Okay. But
Yeah.
it also is paired with my book and all the other platforms. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And that happens automatically through the other part of the distribution process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Good.
All right. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's been an absolute delight. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah. All right. So again,
Okay.
to our listeners, why don't you share with them? Do you have a website that you would like to direct
Oh,
our
yes.
listeners to? Yeah.
Let me put,
Oh, good.
uh,
Yes.
and, and it's thelongestwarmemoir.com.
Great. The longest
is the
war
website.
memoir.com. Great. All right. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And again, great having you.
Okay, thank you.